Hello, my name is Caitlin Griffith, and I'm going to be presenting a program proposal for records management and information governance at River Park University. So let's get started. So first, I wanted to have a common definition, make sure that we all understand what I mean when I say record. I'm going to be using that word a lot over the course of this presentation, and I want to make sure that we have a common understanding of what it means. So I'm pulling this definition from the International Organization of Standardization, and they define a record as information created, received, and maintained as evidence and as an asset by an organization or person in pursuit of legal obligations or in a transaction of business. It's a lot of words, but I want to bring this up because record is not specific to a particular medium. So an email chain is a record as much as a legal document is a record, depending on their use and purpose within the context of the institution. So when I say record, I'm talking about a whole host of things, just so that we all understand what that means. So first, I want to talk about these different structures, these different sort of categories that I've broken out here. The first one, so after reading the report, it became clear that there were some issues, some situations that need to be addressed very, very quickly, things that could worsen quickly or are already in a state that is pretty detrimental to the institution. And those things go into this first category of 60-day goals. The budget that was allotted by the board was for a fiscal year, and these are the priorities of the first 2 months. The next category is 120-day goals, and these are goals that are either extensions of the 60-day goals, sort of the next follow-up steps from there, or they are issues that are pressing but not necessarily as urgent or in a state of emergency as the things that would be taken up in the 60-day goals. And then finally, there are 1-year goals. These are largely sort of forward-looking policies, forward-looking implementations that might help River Park University avoid finding themselves in a situation like they are in currently again. So it's sort of a short-term perspective coupled with this longer-term vision of what records management and information governance could look at like at the institution. So first, in terms of the first 60 days of this records management and information governance program, first and foremost, an RMIG policy is necessary. It needs to be created in collaboration with the information technology team and in collaboration with the legal team, and it needs to be codified and published to staff, students, and faculty as soon as possible. A policy like this determines how records are maintained, how records are stored, who has access to what records. It's really some crucial information, and especially since River Park University doesn't currently have a policy like this, never to my knowledge has had a policy like this. Its creation is really step one. And that in partnership with this records retention schedule is going to be really important as well. A records retention schedule determines how long a record is kept, and it also determines where the record is kept over the course of its life cycle. And I do think that it will be important for both of these new policies to be compliant with something called General Data Protection Regulation. This is a regulation that comes from the European Union, and I understand that might seem like it has nothing to do with us, but this regulation applies to citizens of a country in the European Union wherever they are in the world. So if we have international students from Europe, if we have faculty either visiting or teaching at the university, if we partner with businesses or other institutions based in the European Union, River Park University could be found responsible for adhering to this regulation, even though we're not in the EU. This regulation has a lot to do with privacy and security around personal identifiable information, or PPI. And so it's pretty important, especially because of the high levels of fines associated with this. And I would really hate to see RPU, lose money to fines that we wouldn't have to. So, especially in creating this from the ground up, these policies, having it be compliant with this regulation makes a lot of sense, I think. The next thing that I want to talk about here is this 90-day email retention schedule. I understand why it might seem wise to not, block up these digital storage capabilities that RPU has with email threads, but I really think that we need to pause this until the RMIG policy can be determined. 90 days is quite a short amount of time, and as we discussed previously, emails and email threads are records, and they might have institutional or legal significance, and so we need to determine the answers to those questions with the legal team before we can continue with a 90-day, or even with any email retention schedule. Many industries have implemented a 7-year email retention schedule. I'm not saying that that's mandatorily what we have to do, but I think for now, putting that on pause until we can implement an RMIG policy is probably wise. And then next, I think that we need to locate the urgent places where personally identifiable information is. In the report that I read, 2 departments that were named pretty specifically were financial aid and human resources, with financial aid having misplaced some documents that were necessary for financial aid processing. That puts them sort of on the top of this list of auditing targets, and hopefully, possibly through this audit process, it might be possible to locate some missing documents. And then additionally, human resources fell into this category as well, with this hiring paperwork misplacement. Very happy to hear that it was located quickly thereafter, but to be able to identify the places in the university where there is sensitive personal information and where there has been some sort of history of incident where important documents were lost track of, to make note of that so that we can, in the 120-day goals, begin to audit with those departments. Also, with regards to the human resources paperwork issue, considering digital transference of forms as much as possible is something that should be included in here. I understand that sometimes the transference of physical documents is necessary, but considering how digitization fits into the RMIG policy broadly, but here specifically, I think will be really helpful. And then lastly, for 60 days, I wanted to talk a little bit about the Chief Information Officer document deletion order, where the CIO addressed these 5 departments that appear to share 30 gigabytes of storage, and sort of laid down this line of, you need to delete this data, you need to clean it up within 60 days, or they will direct employees to delete sort of whatever remains. I think that if at all possible, pausing this timeline, because there's so many other moving parts, is best. It doesn't sound like buying more storage is really a possibility from what I read. And if pausing is not possible, then this becomes really urgent, and the first place that we need to implement the RMIG policy to determine what can be either archived or legally responsibly disposed of, and what needs to remain in active storage for easy access. There very well could be redundancies in this 30 gigabytes, which could open up a lot more space, but this, I think, certainly will be something that we need to take up in the first 60 days of this program. Next is the 120-day goals. along with the 60-day goal that we talked about in terms of setting priority for the audit, we need to begin a campus-wide audit of resources and where they are located to determine exactly what the institution has and where it is. That will help a lot in terms of transferring things to an archive, digitizing resources, being able to locate where sensitive or important documents are. It'll just give us a broader picture of what's going on. The next thing that needs to be taken up in this 120-day period are these banker boxes in the basement that are sort of vaguely labeled. They need to be investigated. They need to be moved into archive-safe resources, things that are acid-free, and containers that are reinforced with metal need to be put on shelves that are also in accordance with archival benchmarks. This is an expense, I understand, but it will certainly help in the long run to be able to preserve these documents for longer, so that they can be used. I think also, digitizing what needs to be digitized and disposing of what can be disposed of definitely goes hand in hand with this. But by putting these documents into archive quality materials, you might be able to reduce the cost of the insurance that you're paying right now, which needed to be updated for flood, which I think was really wise. But if you implement some of these steps, if we talk to archivists in the institution who maybe work in special collections and can give some pointers, we might be able to reduce the cost by being better prepared for a natural disaster like a flood. In addition to this, it sounds as though the documents might need to stay in the basement for now because there are no other physical places for the documents to be stored. Hopefully that is temporary. But for any period of time, if documents are being stored in a basement, a dehumidifier is necessary to be able to make sure that these documents do not succumb to mold. Basements are not ideal for holding documents, but until we can free up other space, it's something that we can deal with. Also in this 120 days, the RMIG policy needs to be introduced to staff and student workers and relevant faculty through a training schedule. We can do this hand in hand with the audit schedule, but to audit and also train so that everyone who is dealing with these documents knows how to handle them, where to ask questions, and all of that is going to be really important. Digitizing can also begin in this 120-day period with the direction of the legal team so that we can free up some physical space and organize our digital repositories a little bit more clearly. The other issue that I want to make sure that we take up in this period is the accounts payable office check requests. This is something I read about in the report, and that these requests are filed in triplicate. Unless there's a legally mandatory reason for this, triplicate is not necessary. A lot of those resources can be disposed of and digitized and then disposed of. Obviously, we'll need to consult legal on this, but that is a place where we can pretty easily free up some storage for other materials, certainly. So looking at one-year goals, definitely an ongoing audit and training schedule is something that RPU should consider. Records management and information governance is not a one-time project. It needs to be ongoing, which means that the audits need to happen on a regular basis. New employees, student workers need to be trained regularly, so that we create a culture of record management literacy, information literacy. Also in this category is a disaster recovery plan development. In the report, it mentioned the concern over not being prepared for a natural disaster like a tornado. I think that that's very reasonable. There are a lot of natural disasters like fires and storms that threaten the physical and digital records that an institution holds. So consulting with outside organizations that specialize in this, I think, is very wise. creating a list of priority documents that should be recovered first is also going to be helpful in that process. Purchasing some emergency supplies or putting in emergency technology or tools to be able to help in the case of a disaster is also going to be smart. So I think that this is certainly a priority, but it's not necessarily one that we need to tackle immediately, but should be on the list, absolutely. And then also the organization and expansion of the archive. I think that the archive can really help in a lot of situations that we're looking at in terms of lack of storage for active records that should be archived that are taking up active storage space. I think really leaning into how we can sort of move these records into the final phase of their life cycle is going to be a good idea and will be helpful, certainly in the long run. I also do really want to recommend that the board consider hiring ongoing personnel instead of just on a one-year basis, sort of for as long as the institution has records. Like I mentioned before, records management and information governance policy is not a one-time implementation and then sort of the policy runs on its own. It needs maintenance. It needs someone to conduct the audits, train the staff, adjust anything that needs adjusting in terms of new regulations that are developed. Having consistent personnel, I think, would really benefit the institution. And then I want to talk a little bit about record management literacy. I very much appreciate the trust that I've been given from Dr. Turner and from the Board of Trustees, but record literacy is not just for me. It should be for everyone who interacts with these records. It should be for everyone on the administrative side of the institution. And I think creating a culture of familiarity and understanding of records management and information governance is really going to help RPU maintain the advances that I see them making in the next fiscal year. RMIG knowledge is certainly not a limited resource, or at least it shouldn't be. And then the last thing that I wanted to mention here is consistent budgeting. Beyond this 1 year, records management and information governance policy development needs to be something that is considered in administrative planning circles, and there should be a budget item for it in case technology needs to be purchased, in case additional personnel needs to be hired, or physical materials need to be purchased. It is something that the institution should plan to prioritize in perpetuity. The budget doesn't necessarily need to be as large as it was for this year, but I think it needs to be consistent. And then these are the references, these are the materials that I took a look at in developing this project, or this proposal. This first one here is a video from an organization called Gaylord Archival that talks about how to preserve fragile documents, fragile paper documents. A lot of it has to do with historical archiving, but I think that there are some really good recommendations in here that we could take up over the course of the year. And then this book down here, Information Governance, is really good. I pulled a lot of information for this proposal from that text. So if anyone has any questions, you can definitely consult these references. Thank you very much.